Hey everybody, welcome back to a third bonus video that I have for you. This one's a little bit different than the other two that we talked about, but I find that this is really important in the class that we're doing. This class really relies a lot on social sciences. We're looking obviously at ministry concepts, and obviously we're thinking about theology, and we'll talk a lot more about that in the upcoming weeks. But also this class has you reading research articles as well, which is really important in the work that we do. And here's why. As you do ministry, as you do leadership, people are going to come to you with questions about young people, about emerging adults. As a matter of fact, some will come to you with articles that they found from a particular periodical or something they saw on Twitter or on Facebook. And it's in those moments that you have a really important job. And that is to curate good articles from bad articles, good research from bad research. There's a lot of bad research out there. There's a lot of assumptions that people make about perhaps an article that they read or the way something was formed that can sometimes shape our imaginations and actually throw us off course. So part of our job as leaders, whether you're a youth pastor or you're working with emerging adults or you're a senior leader or you're a teacher, is to curate good literature that actually is going to help and be true to solving and working with young people, that honors them and actually represents them well. So this is really important. So in this particular bonus video that I have for you, I just want to talk about, like, how do we read research? What do we look for? How do we actually read a research article? And I hope you find this helpful. So let's talk about this idea of reading and interrogating research. In any research article, you basically have these categories. You have this section that is going to talk about previous knowledge, and this is usually in the introduction. There's sort of a clarity of the problem and the purpose. Well, what is this article going to talk about? There's a discussion of the research methods. What did they do? There's data and presentation of findings. What did they discover, and what did they find out, and what was going on? There's a style. Does it read well? And then there's a discussion that talks about, well, what does this all mean? How do we move the conversation forward? What are the limitations to the work that was done? What new questions need to be asked? Now, there's a lot there. Let me just try to break this down a little bit. So previous knowledge identifies the key studies relevant to the topic. As a matter of fact, as you read articles on emerging adulthood, probably quite often you will hear Jeffrey Arnett's name mentioned, because he's the one that sort of coined the phrase, right? So in order to understand a particular sort of topic, you have to understand the conversation that's happened. Sometimes I liken this to a cocktail party, okay? Imagine you're at a cocktail party, and you're all sort of milling around, and you see a group of people in a circle that are all talking, okay? And you walk over to that circle and you bust in and you start sharing your opinion about a topic that you think is really, really important to you. And you're really smart, so you're really passionate, and you're really talking about this. And you find that the cocktail table, the people begin to back away and they start having a conversation somewhere else. And you realize that you've blown it. Why? Because you didn't enter the cocktail party and that conversation very well. A good person at a cocktail party that sees a conversation of people gathered around knows how to walk up and almost stand outside the circle. They listen to what the subject is and what the topics are and what they're talking about, and gently you step a little bit closer into the circle, still listening, trying to understand what the conversation is about. And then at some point, you might tentatively ask a question or offer a point of view. You see the difference? That feel, that imagery is really what the way academic discourse works. There's always an awareness of conversation that's happening around us before we just jump in and state our opinions. That's why this course is so important. I'm trying to introduce you to the conversation, because if you understand the conversation, you'll be able to know what questions to ask, understand maybe where the gaps are in some interesting ideas that you might be interested in, and know how to talk about it. I find a lot of times on Twitter or in certain conversations and maybe some of our faith communities, people like to spew out their opinions, but they don't really understand the conversation. One of the phrases that I hear a lot, I hear this in ministry a lot, is like, hey, nobody's talking about XYZ, whatever that topic is. And in my mind, I'm going, no, actually, a lot of people are talking about XYZ. You just don't know it. See the difference? So this idea of understanding and identifying the studies that you're engaging is what's really important in any sort of research paper. So you situate the research, and it names the questions of what you're setting out to know. So you kind of say, here's what we know about emerging adulthood. Here's a particular part of it that is really interesting. Here's what some people have said about it. And here's what I want to know about this conversation. And this is what my study is about. You see how that looks like? So you'll typically find that in the introduction of an article. Secondly, there's just sort of this clarity of the problem or the purpose. What is the actual research question? Is it reasonable? Is it answerable? Does the study attempt to actually answer it? This is really, really important. Usually you'll find that questions are often very specific. It can be really frustrating because you're like, I wish that was a little bit broader. But there's a humility in research that recognizes the fact that based on limitations, there's only so much we can do. I'm working with a colleague in Hong Kong right now, and they were trying to study college students through a particular parachurch organization. And the question that I keep asking as I'm consulting this colleague is this, is like, what's your scope? What kind of resources do you have? That will in many ways shape the question that you're hoping to discover. How many people are you going to have? What's your methodology? These are things that I'm trying to help them understand. But unless we understand the scope of our ability to answer a question, we can sometimes miss that point. Then there's the research methods. It establishes some sort of theoretical framework. A lot of times, the way research is done is that we see how other research is done, and we try to implement it in similar ways. Because when research is similar, it can talk to each other. If research is really different between two different projects, it's sometimes hard to know how to bring them together because the definitions are different. The methodologies are different. We find this a lot with different research organizations. Like if you look at Barna research compared to Pew Research, you're going to find that they're going to have some different opinions about young people, about who's faithful, about who's attending church and all that comes with that. And the challenge that we have with that is to think about how those actually work together, because I think Barna's definitions of what a faithful Christian is may have much more conservative definitions than, say, what Pew Research has. And so this creates some challenges in the way these research projects actually talk to each other. Then there's just the methodology. Is this quantitative? Is it qualitative? Is it mixed methods where they're using both? That's really important to understand. And then who is studied? Does the sample make sense in size or who that they looked at? So if you have a sample, I'm doing research and like everybody in the sample was only male, and you're saying, well, this applies to everybody, we would say that that's a problem. So we just sort of look and be really clear on the research methods. And then the data and the findings. This is where the researcher has to really begin to clearly summarize and pull what they're finding together. Is it clear? Is the sample representative? Are there good control variables? Are there too many variables that make it really hard to figure out? Again, this coaching that I'm doing, this consulting that I'm doing for my colleague in Hong Kong, I was asking this person, like, how many schools are you going to look at? Because the more schools you have, the more variables you have, that will make that harder than looking at one school and perhaps some of the work that you want to do. Is the data summarized well? Is it believable? Is it credible? And can you actually understand the charts and the figures? I find a lot of times when we look at research articles, we kind of gloss over the chart. Like, oh my gosh, it's just a chart. I'm going to move on. Here's a discipline for you that I really encourage you to do. When you come across a chart, don't move on until you can explain it. A picture tells 1,000 words. And it can really synthesize your understanding of the research if you could take a minute to understand it. If you don't understand it, well, then dig a little bit deeper. Take that time to understand those charts and graphs because it'll help you understand what the researcher is actually doing. There's just a style. Who's the author writing to? Is it their people in their guild? Is it a broader popular audience? This has a huge effect. What assumptions are being made about the audience and about what they're actually sharing? Typically, a good article is a third previous knowledge, a third research methods and data, and a third discussion. So you should be able to see a rhythm associated with that. And is the article just easy to follow? I mean, there should be, headings and subheadings that help and guide you along the way. We should write this way, but these are things you can look for as you're reading research. And then finally, with the discussion, is there the question, is it clear? Do they talk about the research? And then what does the data reveal? But notice the data is plural, it's not singular. So it's not the data reveals, it's the or the data is, it's the data are, okay? Always remember that. I always have to kind of remind some of my students about that along the way. Is bias acknowledged? As researchers, we come with bias. We can't escape that. Now, some researchers actually say that, our point of view actually isn't a hindrance. It's actually a help. It's actually both. But if we don't understand our own biases, our backgrounds that have an effect on the way we interpret the work that we do, we run into problems. And so the discussion answers the question, so what? Like, what am I supposed to do with this? And then what new questions are revealed? Good research answers some questions and raises more. And then what are the limitations? What does the study not do? Where did the research run into problems? What did it miss, and what would it do if it could do it over again? So this is sort of the ways that we can read a research article, keeping these things in mind. Now, one more thing that's really important is that when we think about these different aspects, just remember there's the authors and the abstract. So find out, who's writing this and why. You have the introduction and the literature review. That's the cocktail party. You have the methodology. How did they go about doing it? You have the results. You have the discussion, which is sort of pulling it all together and talking about that. And then you have some sort of conclusion. Now, when you read a research article, a lot of times my students think that they just need to read it from beginning to end. But I want to argue that there's a better way, because sometimes as a researcher and as an academic, we have to read things rather quickly. We're trying to find the pieces or the articles that actually are pertinent to our conversation or the cocktail party that we want to be a part of. And so if we read everything from start to end all the time, it's really an inefficient way to read them. So typically what I'll start with is not in this order, but in this order. I'll find out who the authors are. I'll try to get a sense of the literature review and what the question is. I'll jump to the discussion to see what the conclusions were. And if the article makes sense, or I find that this actually could be an article that can be part of my literature review or can help with my research, then I'll go back and I'll read the methodology and I'll try to understand the results. See the difference? This allows me to read through articles more quickly and make sure that I really hone in on the ones that are relevant to the work that I'm doing. Now, as you think about your future and you think about the research that you might do, whether you are going to be a researcher or just as a leader, part of our job is to curate the work that we do and the work that we pass on to those that we are leading. And I think when we keep these things in mind, we can be much better at passing along good and faithful and reliable articles that actually can help our cause rather than being inundated by a lot of different articles that perhaps don't hold the weight that they need to. So I hope this is helpful. Again, as we read these articles, this is a way for you to practice these things, and I hope that is something that can serve you well. Take care.